yeah, the day I had my first chicken nugget in 7th grade was quite an experience. There's a lot of vegetarian substitutes for a lot of that, right? Veggie beef, veggie chicken, all the different things that we grew up on. You know, the veggie equivalent of coffee, caffeine free. But so like there was just a lot of dietary stuff that we grew up not being able to have certain things, eat certain things. Me and my two brothers, we were all three of us were very, very skinny growing up, and my mom had very much concerns of us because of that and thought we were malnourished. And it's like, well, you go to Subway and eat a sandwich and it's just lettuce and cheese. And so, but that was just our experience.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel, Find the Alternative. I'm your host, Adam, a 10-year former member of the World Mission Society Church of God in Salt Lake City, Utah. Today, we're doing another American, I guess what we call cult group, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which me and Chris, which I'll introduce him here in a minute, and he'll be able to tell a little bit about himself, and we'll ask him a bunch of questions. But what's interesting with me and Chris is even though he was raised Seventh-day Adventist, I was in a knockoff Seventh-day Adventist branch, I guess we would call it. So the wmscog actually originated from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, rather. It broke off. One of their members got kicked out and then started his own church. And then eventually he became not only a prophet, but he became second coming Jesus, as it were. And we'll kind of dive into that a little bit here. But Chris, the floor is yours. Introduce yourself to the viewers here.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Adam. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so my name's Chris. I am third generation Adventist, or at least was. Grew up in the Adventist church. My parents were Adventist. My grandparents were Seventh-day Adventist. And so I'd say, I'm a mid-'80s guy, and so born in the mid-'80s. So yeah, in the '80s and most of the '90s was raised in the Adventist church. And so it was around the 97, 98 that my family kind of left Adventism. And so I'm sure we'll get a little bit more into that. But yeah, just upbringing, very much a part of our life, our culture, community. Our school went to Adventist school. And so, just from that stage of life, just didn't really know a whole lot, but it just was a large part of my experience upbringing. So I'm happy to dive into this with you.
Awesome. I appreciate it. I didn't know they had a Seventh-day Adventist school. Could you elaborate on that really quick? What is that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I would imagine this is the same thing around the country, at least as far as where we grew up. The state, the Adventist church within the state, most of the churches had associated schools that were primarily funded through the church. And so the schools are pretty small. I mean, they were in the same town. And so each town that had an Adventist church typically had an associated school that the church basically funded and paid for the salaries and everything for the teachers. The schools, at least the one that I grew up in, from preschool all the way through 7th grade, was, I'd say, max attendance, or at least max, however, between K through 8, that there was about maybe 50 students tops through all of those grades. So, I mean, you're going to a school where you maybe have one or two other kids your age and your grade. But yeah, they combined classes. So you had your 1st through 4th grade, 5th through 8th grade. But yeah, so it was an Adventist school. Most of the people that went to the school were also part of the local church.
That's super interesting. I did not know that. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And maybe for the viewers who don't know what the Seventh-day Adventist Church is, essentially, to make a long story short, it was a break-off group from the William Miller movement, who was a very big religious leader back in the 1830s to 1840s. There was something called the Great Disappointment, which Christ was supposed to make an appearance on October 22nd, 1844, which didn't happen. And then later, one of the Millerites, which was Ellen G. White, who is the prophetess of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, she established it in 1856, wrong century. And through that, basically their doctrine was they kept the seventh day, right, from sunset Friday night to sunset Saturday, and they taught very strict dietary rules. But we'll kind of get into that a little bit. But just so that way the viewers kind of know a little bit what the SDA church is there. I guess we'll dive into the questions now. What was the moment your family, I guess, realized that the Seventh-day Adventist might not be the truth?
Yeah, so it was largely, I'd say, the tail end of the '90s. I it was 7th grade that, so that would have been 97 for me, that my parents started having I remember hearing them have those conversations at home, and they had gone to some other churches on Sunday, which I don't really remember what prompted them to do that, but I just know that they'd gone to some other churches that had a lot more lively, energetic, just preaching and worship, and not that it was all about the liveliness, but just people that just felt a lot more connected, and just relational with Christ and their faith. And there was just a lot more joy in those churches. And I'm not saying that all Adventists don't have joy, but there was just a lot more joy is what they experienced. And it was around the late '90s that kind of led them out of Adventism as they started investigating the doctrines, investigating the truth claims, especially as they just had a much, I'd say, better understanding of the New Testament, and the freedom from the law. And so, being still under the household, me and my brothers kind of we followed suit with that, and we no longer went to the Adventist school after that point. But I'd say it was the late '90s that kind of started to change for them, and it created a lot of strife and division within the family, which I know it happens typically with a lot of different religions when you leave. My grandparents on both sides being very disappointed in that. But yeah, it was around the late '90s, and it's largely because my parents went to a church that was preaching truth and just let them to investigate.
Yeah, and that's usually what happens is once that door is open, people sprint through it and they lock it behind them, Speaking for myself. So, if I remember correctly, in Seventh-day Adventism, going to another church, especially one that is worshiping on Sunday, that's a big no-no because
Yeah,
they consider that like Babylon the Great, that you're receiving the mark of the beast if you go to church on Sunday. Is that accurate?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was what I believed growing up. And again, I don't remember exactly what led my parents to go to that church. It might have been an invitation from someone else, but um, I guess I can back up really quick. In the mid '90s, the Adventist church that we were a part of and going to, my parents wanted to start a new church plant that had a little bit more, you know, I'll just say a little bit more uh, contemporary music, and so they did a church plant, and it was initially under the Adventist umbrella, and over the next year or two, though, because they started to institute some things like coffee and some different types of music that was maybe a little too contemporary, that started to lose a lot of people that were still Adventists who were going to that church, and ultimately they ended up changing over to non-denominational. But yeah, it was something that we started off on Saturday, and so that was very much part of the Adventist culture, and then it kind of morphed into a Sunday church once we left Adventism. But that was my experience growing up, is that yeah, you don't go to church on Sunday. People that went to church on Sunday were not saved. And if I remember, that what was taught to me is that only the most devout Christians that go to church on Sunday, God might make an exception for them. So I don't really remember why my parents went to this other church on a Sunday, but yes, to answer your question, it is very much kind of a no no. And I had very judgmental, understanding of people that did go to church on Sunday, and just couldn't believe why someone would want to do that.
Right, because Sabbath day is God's day, and they make this whole
Yeah.
case about the seventh day and the law and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
If you were to summarize your upbringing in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, what would it? How could you explain in one sentence how it felt like? I guess being a Seventh-day Adventist. Like, were you isolated? Did you feel isolated? Could you not do certain things as the other kids?
Yeah, so I'd say it was very much living in a bubble, and I'll explain that. And I'd say in a lot of ways it was very regimented in what we could and couldn't do. And so, on the one hand, like, I feel like I didn't really know too much differently, because not only were we going to an Adventist church, but as I mentioned, we went to an Adventist school. So you're really spending the entirety of my existence in an Adventist community, and that was kind of the bubble part of it, right? So the people I went to school with Monday through Friday were the same people I went to church with on Saturday, were the same people that we'd hang out and play games and sports and stuff on Sunday, right? And so up until we left, I mean, that was my whole world. And so that's kind of the summary, I'd say, is very much living in a bubble. And on the one hand, it's I feel like very conservative, obviously, and it was a very wholesome and moral kind of community. But at the same time, yeah, there's a lot of things we couldn't do on Saturdays, or I'd say Sunset Friday to Sunset Saturday. Playing sports is a big thing. So a lot of my friends, that were outside of the Adventist church, or I'd say the Adventist friends we had that were not as bought into it, they were able to watch a movie on Saturday, or they were able to play a board game on a Saturday, or they were able to, play sports or whatever else. And so, yeah, it was. it was very regimented when it came to the Sabbath, sunset Friday to sunset Saturday, and I think that's where I probably have the most vivid memories and some pretty funny, stories now in hindsight that I could share on, things that we got in trouble for, things like that. But yeah, I'd say that's probably the biggest way to describe that was just very much kinda living in a bubble that was everyone, thought the same, acted the same, behaved the same, and so you didn't really think much of it until you started engaging with other people that were outside of the Adventist church, and you're just like, "Man, like, they get to do this, they get to do that, and I don't," and, so, yeah, it was very interesting, and it's just in hindsight, we kinda get a kick out of some of it, but, at the end of the day, I mean, we were very moral, very, wholesome people, so, I mean, I guess that was good.
Yeah, and if you could speak a little bit to this, were you encouraged or discouraged from talking to people outside of the group?
I don't know if I was necessarily encouraged or discouraged, either one, to be honest. Maybe a little bit more so discouraged in the sense that when we started leaving the Adventist church and engaging with people that were, followers of Christ but went to church on Sunday or were able to do certain things on Saturday, there was maybe a little bit of some drawback to that and just like, okay, hey, like, who are you talking to? Why are you doing like, I think there was some caution to that kind of played down from my parents and just the community at large. And in that transition period where we were leaving the church, I think there was, I'm in junior high, right? So I think there's kind of a little bit of that rebellious kind of nature, as you kind of hit those junior high years and the way I dressed and the way I listen to the music I'll listen to, and so I think it was an interesting time period for us to leave the church because I feel like some of the things that I was starting to do on Saturdays or on Friday nights were quote rebellious and not something that was allowed, but that was just kind of part of the stage of life I was in, as well as the people starting to influence just our worldview at that stage of life.
During your upbringing and going to church, was Ellen G. White a major talking point, I guess, in the
Oh,
church and was discussed frequently as the prophetess and that kind of thing?
yeah, so absolutely, the church very much taught that. It was very much a part of the, just the culture of the church. My household specifically growing up, it's interesting. My parents weren't too concerned with really teaching that in the home and just what she said and did and believed. And so I felt like, to one hand, that was probably a good thing because we still had, I think, a very high view of the Bible, or we did. But yeah, the church, that was definitely part of the church. And so yeah, I mean, it was talked about in Sundays, or sorry, not Sunday, Sabbath schools. And so I knew who she was. I knew when she existed in kind of the time period of when she came about and established Adventist Church. And it's kind of funny you mentioned the Great Disappointment, and I do have a vivid memory of one Saturday at church they decided to reenact the Great Disappointment, and so it's we all went outside that church Saturday and we just all looked up at the sky for 30 minutes as a church congregation, then went back inside. And so it was just it's kind of one of those funny stories, right? But like, and so that know why we did that, but that was just part of, I think, some of the things they taught in relation to Ellen White, and not that she taught that, but that was just more of an experience. But like,
Yeah.
it just was just interesting. Yeah, we knew who she was, and we're familiar with just kind of the stories. But yeah, it was nothing that at home really was a significant topic, and I think that was just our unique situation in my upbringing. But I think obviously in a lot of SDA homes, that was very much she was very much a prominent figure and a prophetess that they very much held in high esteem.
Did they have like pictures of her and stuff all over, like in the church?
So I don't remember a lot of pictures in the church, but yes, there were handbooks, there were different pamphlets, there were different materials that were on the wall, like different types of end times books and things, and Ellen G. White books, and so I do remember that there was materials in the main lobby, but I don't really remember too many portraits or pictures of her all around. But I mean, you definitely got to feel like you knew that she was important just with the literature that was stationed all around the church.
From kind of walk us through those rules and how they were observed.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Be right back, bud. Yeah, so all the above, right? So the first thing was is that we were raised vegetarian, and so it's interesting because I mean that definitely stemmed from the Adventist worldview, and so we didn't drink caffeine or specifically coffee or didn't eat meat. And I know that that was probably subjective based on, different Adventist understanding, but I mean, yeah, we were vegetarian, and it was just I remember, me and my 2 brothers, we were all 3 of us were very, very skinny growing up, and my mom had very much concerns of us because of that and thought we were malnourished, and it's like, well, you go to Subway and eat a sandwich and it's just lettuce and cheese, and so but that was just our experience. There's no meat on it, and so I thought meat was wrong and was bad. That's just the way the culture I was raised in. So there's a lot of vegetarian substitutes for a lot of that, right? Veggie beef, veggie chicken, all the different things that we grew up on. You know, the veggie equivalent of coffee, caffeine free. But so like there was just a lot of dietary stuff that we grew up not being able to have certain things, eat certain things. Yeah, the day I had my first chicken nugget in seventh grade was quite an experience.
Oh my
But
gosh.
yes, I was just like, man, wow, this is great. But yeah, there was dietary restrictions. We very much could not do anything Sunset Friday, Sunset Saturday. And so, yeah, it was very strict down to the minute. Obviously, when the sun set, when we what we could and couldn't do, and we grew up playing original Nintendo, and so I mean that thing had to get shut off down to the minute, on a Friday night. But as soon as Saturday night was rolling around and we're watching the clock and it hit 7:52 p.m. or whenever it said the sunset was, it's just like boom, Nintendo on and games and throwing football and all that, right? It's just like it was so fascinating to look back on and think it's just like, that God was concerned about me playing Nintendo down to the minute of sunset, which is really just when the sun goes behind the horizon. Just as the earth rotation, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just yeah, the dietary stuff, what we couldn't do on Saturday was largely the main things, growing up. Um, the movies we couldn't watch. But yeah, so like I said, some of it was probably good in hindsight that we were sheltered from certain things. I feel like me and my brothers had a very strong moral foundation, but at the same time, the rationale and the reason behind it was very, very much legalistic because God approved or didn't approve of it. And it was void, at least for me, a lot of it was void of a relationship with Christ. And it was just done out of just because that's just what we did.
Yeah. And walk us through what a service looks like. Like you go to a church building on Saturday. Like
Yeah.
how long is the service? Like kind of walk us through going to church in a Seventh-day Adventist church. How is that like?
Yeah, so again, I don't know if this is something that is changed since the late 90s, but yeah, I mean, first of all, we would wake up, Saturday morning, we would get very much dressed up, which is not necessarily a problem. People dress up going to church, but I mean, for us, it was, even at the age of 5 and 6 and 10, I mean, we're wearing, slacks, button up shirt, tie, all that, and dress shoes. And so, yeah, you'd go rolling into church at whatever the time was, 9:30, 10 o'clock. They would do kind of the initial like Sabbath school down in the basement. It was all the kids stuff, and then the upstairs and the main auditorium was where I guess the parents did like kind of like a Sunday. I keep saying Sunday, Saturday teaching. So yeah, we'd roll into our age group classroom. We would sing some songs. They would go through, whoever's teaching it would go through maybe some kind of lesson. And so we would do that for like, I don't know, about 30 minutes, 45 minutes. And then we would have a little bit of a break as we came upstairs and then getting ready to go into the auditorium for like kind of the main worship service. And so, yeah, I mean, it was pews, it was hymnals. Again, not that there's a problem with hymnals. It is organ, there'd just be an organist that was playing songs and we'd just sing from our hymnals. Very, very, I'd say traditional in that sense, and then you would have a pastor come up and then, kind of preach a message, and then you maybe, so in the middle, you would have like a kind of a children's story, so we'd go down to the front, right, and do our kind of classic children's story for a little bit, and then we'd conclude maybe with like singing a song at the end. And so, yeah, very, very traditional. Not that there's a problem with traditional, but yeah, it's just interesting. Some good, funny stories of just the services that we attended. Just memories I have of, we'd have these little kids like student kind of guidebook things they'd hand out in the morning class, and I'd be sitting there doing that in the middle of the service just to have something to entertain me. And I'd get called out from the stage from the pastor being like, "Oh, like, Chris, put that away." And it's like, there wasn't a whole lot of people that were part of this service. I mean, I'd probably say there's maybe 150 people that were part of this service. But yeah, it was probably an hour and a half ish long. And then after that, get done right around, lunchtime. And so we'd all hang out and talk with friends for a little bit outside. Me and my brothers we'd be running around the yard out front, and then we'd go home for lunch, and that was just the best time just to kind of get out of the clothes, right? But yeah, I mean that was pretty much every week was kind of followed that form and that format. Some weeks, since the school was attached, or what the church funded the school, that going to the school, we would have choir, or we would sing songs at school, but then we would maybe on a Saturday we would show up and we would sing a couple songs. The school kids, right, would show up on the stage and sing some songs for the church. It kind of has some tie-ins with the school there, so that was maybe the most variation you get.
Gotcha. Well, in the wmscog, we would go to our church service. We would go, and for those who don't know what the wmscog is, it's like I said in the beginning, it's a offshoot, and I say that very loosely, of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. There was a Korean man who was a part of the SDA church, but started teaching his own stuff, got kicked out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, started his own church, and then started teaching all these crazy prophecies, and then eventually being elevated to not only a prophet, but second coming Jesus. So our Seventh-day observance wasn't from Friday to Saturday evening. It was from morning, like Saturday morning until Sunday morning, because I guess they were daytime reckoning or whatever you want to call that. And we would have to be there at 9 a.m. And then we didn't leave the building until sometimes 9 or 10 p.m.
Oh wow, so all day.
all day. So lunch and dinner, whereas in the church, we stayed literally at the church all day. And we wouldn't leave until it's dark.
Wow, yeah, that's a long day.
Yeah. It's yeah.
So I mean, there would be some Saturdays, I guess, where we would go over to the school building and we do like the potlucks, right? So I mean, that was something that was very much part of the culture, was just the potluck. So we go back over to the school and we might stay there till 2, 3 in the afternoon. But yeah, it was never an all day deal till nighttime.
And there's 3 services too. So you have one at 9
Oh
a.m.,
wow,
one at 3 p.m., and one at 8 p.m. And you're dressed to the nines for all of them. And so are the kids, just like what you were saying. And yeah, and because you're always, I don't know if this is how it was in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but you're always scared that one violation of the Sabbath or one violation of these rules could carry severe consequences, like
yeah.
damnation, right? Like
hmm
losing your salvation, losing your standing with God. Did you feel that as a kid, that pressure?
Yeah, absolutely. And so very much so. I'd say in the early years, absolutely. And then as it kind of hit the mid 90s, the last couple years, especially after my parents did a church plant where it was a little bit more contemporary, I think that some of that pressure started to go away as we started to kind of slowly make our way out of it. But yeah, I mean, man, I just remember going to church, right? And this is probably early 90s. I'm in grade school. And I'm, like you said, dressed up, suit and tie more or less with nice shoes. And I remember seeing a buddy from school that we're second, third grade, and going to the Sabbath school that morning. I remember seeing him. He was wearing basketball shoes, like Nike Air Jordan basketball shoes, and just remember thinking, like, does he know what he's like doing right now? How like upsetting this is to God? How much of a sinner? Like, I couldn't believe it, right? And then that was just the mindset that I had with a lot of things, and so. Yeah, I mean, it's just like we would play a board game on a Saturday and I'd get, chewed out for that. And so, like, you quickly develop this idea of like, okay, hey, like the smallest little mistake, it gets criticized and just chopped apart, from somebody who's paying attention, and you just felt very guilty for doing that stuff. And it was very much, I felt like, just so legalistic in the sense where it wasn't like we were spending our Saturdays growing in a relationship with God and Jesus. It was more so looking around and pointing out, all the things everyone else was doing that were wrong, and trying to hold everyone else accountable. Is a very judgmental kind of a framework. And so, but yeah, it put a lot of guilt, especially as a kid, right? On just like, oh my goodness, like I can't do this, I can't do that, and I better not. And then when you would see somebody who was doing something, you very much had this idea of like, man, what a sinner this dude is, right? And it was just really sad, I think, looking back. I mean, there's some funny stories we look back and kind of laugh about now, but like when you just think about just the framework, the worldview and the ideology that goes into that, it's just, yeah, it definitely, I think, was something that it was not glorifying God. It was just more like, man, like I better make sure I'm doing every little thing I can do right. But you just never really knew, like, am I doing everything right? Is the fact that I threw a football to a buddy on Saturday, am I condemned for that? Like, right. So it was hard to know. And it turned into a lot of subjective, arbitrary, different families had different rules and what kids could and couldn't do. And you started to question, like, well, why can he do this and I can't do this? And it got to be really confusing. Everyone started making their own standard for what you could and couldn't do. So yeah, there's a lot of pressure, a lot of guilt, but then a lot of confusion too.
Yeah, and it's hard too because you can't question the narrative, right? If you question the narrative, it means you don't have faith or you're cooling off, you're becoming demon possessed, or you're listening to the whispers of Satan. And so you need 100% total adherence to the
Yeah.
narrative, and any dissension is not tolerated. Any outside
Yeah.
thoughts or whatever, they can mask it however they want. They'll say God's thoughts aren't your thoughts, or they'll say his ways aren't your ways. And that implies everything that the church or the narrative that's being presented to you is basically being portrayed as God's thoughts. And you're like, well, I don't agree with this. Well, are you going to argue with God? I don't think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much so.
So I guess in the case of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, did they ever, because they don't, obviously Sundays, Mark of the Beast, pagan, all that kind of stuff. So do they observe holidays then?
Yeah. I don't remember ever having an issue or remembering that there was an issue that the church or my family took with any holidays. We celebrated, I mean, all the main holidays, right? I mean, Christmas, Thanksgiving, 4th of July, Labor Day, Memorial Day, all of that, right? So, yeah, I don't remember there ever being an issue with holidays. That might have just been maybe the kind of the branch or offshoot of Adventism we were in, but I guess I didn't, growing up, I didn't know any different. I'm like, yeah, holidays were fine for us. So, yeah, I mean, in birthdays were no issues with birthdays or anything like that. I don't remember anything specific that there was like, no, we do not celebrate. I mean, maybe Halloween. I don't know if Halloween's necessarily a formal holiday or whatnot, but even still, like growing up, like Halloween, like our parents let us go out and do stuff on Halloween. So I don't know if that's being a rebel Adventist or not, but I mean, for the most part, it was pretty open when it came to holidays, and I don't remember there ever being an issue with any one specific.
See, that to me is crazy because they have like the vegetarian law, like in the Garden of Eden, given to Adam and Eve. Then they have the Sabbath law, which is the old covenant. But yet they're fine, and Sunday is the pagan sun god worshiping day that's going to condemn you to hell. But then they're fine with all these other quote unquote pagan holidays.
Yeah, and I think that's just where for us, you start to see some of the picking and choosing, right? And this is okay, but that's not okay. But if that's not okay, then why is this okay? And so I'd say largely when I hit sixth, seventh grade, at least right before we kind of left it, I think it became more and more apparent that it's really was just kind of just grounded in whatever certain people wanted to do and thought was okay. And you're like, okay, well, what's the grounding? What's the authority for this? And yeah, Ellen White was an authority, but when you start looking at the scriptures, especially the New Testament and the New Covenant, you quickly just realize like how ridiculous some of that stuff was. So yeah, it was interesting that they're okay with some things, not okay with the others. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think that's just kind of where my parents started to recognize that. And then obviously, me and my brothers kind of followed suit with a lot of that.
So in the wmscog, we weren't allowed to do any holidays. So my kids, the first time they celebrated Christmas or any holiday really was outside of this organization. So we raised our kids not being able to keep anything. And it's funny to me now because it's like one of those things, like you were saying, back then it seemed like, oh, I can't let my kids do this, or I can't do this because my soul, all these arbitrary things that we're talking about. Now I look back and I'm like, how did this make sense to me at one point? How did I
Mm-hmm.
let this control or rule my life? I have no idea
Mm-hmm.
how that happened. But anyway, like for an example, we weren't even allowed to, because my mom, she makes cookies for every holiday. And sorry if you're listening to this, Mom, but she would make like Christmas cookies, right? And I wasn't allowed to eat them. I had to throw them away.
Mm.
Every holiday, I would
Wow.
have to throw them away because that's basically what we were taught. It's food sacrificed to idols, right? Because a cookie in the shape of Santa or snowman or a pumpkin cookie or something like that's going to send you to hell because that's food sacrificed to idols. That's how intense it was. And
And
so
yeah, it's intense.
I remember getting Christmas presents, and basically that's not allowed. And so what we would do, because of just all the fear and we don't want to make God mad and this and that and the other, we would actually take the presents, go return them, and then buy new ones, the same exact thing, to like, because we were like, well, we're given these presents, God's watching us, like we have to go return it and then get the same thing, but we'll buy it. Like, it just like
Yeah.
those kind of things where we
Yeah.
would do that, and
Yeah.
it seemed normal and it seemed like it made sense to us. But
Yep.
now it's just one of those things where you're like, I can't believe I did that. And I was in my 20s, right? I was a grown man doing this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Um, is there any like weird quirks that you guys had to do that's kind of something like that?
Yeah, I mean, uh, not necessarily, obviously, with not the holidays. Uh, I mean, it was really just the Sunset Friday to Sunset Saturday that was just so odd in the sense where, yeah, you kind of grow up. And then, for me, again, I'm in grade school. So, like, I probably didn't think too much about it because I was just the culture and the community and just the bubble that we were in with the school and the church. And so, when we go on vacations to my grandparents' house, right, you're going to the Adventist church there, and they live in Adventist communities in different states. And so you don't really know much outside of that, right? And so, without having an outside the bubble perspective, yeah, you kind of look back and you're just like, well, why did I think any of this? Well, because I didn't know any different, right? And you're kind of raised in that environment where you're so inside this bubble until you kind of see outside the bubble, you just don't know any different. And so, but yeah, I mean, the quirks, I mean, yeah, lots of quirks. I mean, it was just primarily the Sunset Friday, Sunset Saturday. So, really couldn't do anything during that time period. But it was just, a lot of subjective, just things that, you could play a Bible board game. You couldn't play a regular board game, So it's just as funny that it's just like, okay, I'm still playing a board game and I'm still competing against other people in this board game, but because the board has, Bible characters on it, as opposed to like Monopoly characters. Yep, I see, but cool. Because the board game had Bible characters as opposed to like Monopoly characters, that then therefore made it better, right? And that made it appropriate in God's eyes. I mean, the core, fundamental issue of playing a game didn't matter. But yet when it came to, but it was just a lot of things like that, right? Like it was sports too. So I mean, I remember playing just a game of just football in our backyard with my buddies, my friends, right? Just two teams, whatever, 3v3, 4v4, with a Nerf football, just playing football. And some parents thought that was okay, but I remember this one dad coming over and pulling his boy out and being like, Nate can throw a football back and forth, but he can't play a game. And that's where he drew the line, right? So it's like the act of throwing a football, he could throw a football, but as soon as you called it a game, it was wrong, right? So it's just a lot of these things where it's just like, well, it's the same thing with the board game. Like, you could do the behavior. It's just the context of the behavior, you change it a little bit and then it was either right or wrong. And so, you're still doing the fundamental behavior. It's just, yeah, just little quirky things like that, right? We could watch. I don't know if you remember McGee and Me. Do you remember McGee and Me from the '90s? It was like kind of like it was like a show. It was like it was this kid, real kid, but he drew this cartoon that came to life, and it was all had these very, you know, Christian kind of moral stories, and so like we could watch that because it had some Bible verses they talk about, and they're like short little 20-minute videos, but yet you couldn't watch anything else, right? So you're still watching something on a TV, the TV's on, you're watching a show, but because it had like a little moral kind of Bible framework, then that was okay. But as soon as you popped in, like, you want to watch a football game, like, could do that. It just was just very, very selective. So you're still doing the core behavior. And I think that was probably the biggest quirk that you start thinking about. Like, I'm still doing the core behavior, but I'm just redefining what it is that I'm doing. And therefore now it's okay. Right. So yeah, if that answers your question, that was probably the biggest quirks, or just things like that.
Yeah, and it's weird how they all add up. I remember growing up LDS, it was similar, but on Sunday, my mom would have like
Hmm.
Sunday approved material, right? No football, no sports, no swimming. For some reason, they don't like water
Yeah.
on Sunday for whatever reason. And I had to watch like approved church material on Sunday. So that kind of reminds me a little bit about my LDS upbringing. And it's just so crazy to me because, like, talking about Seventh-day Adventists, it's like, okay, if you enter this church building on Saturday, you're saved. But if you wait a whole 24 hours to enter a church building, you're done. You're
Yeah.
toast.
Yeah.
And it's so crazy how these groups take God and they make him into almost like a crazy, jealous ex-girlfriend that just wants total and complete control over
Yeah.
everything that you do. And it's like, that's not God. Like, Jesus says that he is the truth and the life, and the truth will set you free. And Paul even says it's for freedom's sake that you've been set free. But these groups create these arbitrary rules and they imply them onto you as if they are God. And at the end of the day, it's just to control you. It's just for control. It's it's not for God's purposes. It's not for Christ's purposes, because Christ came to take the shackles off. But these groups are
Hmm.
like, oh, he may have taken those shackles off, but those shackles were dirty. Here's some nice shiny ones. Let's put these ones on. You want these, right? But that's just how these groups operate here, and it's crazy to me.
Yeah, and sometimes I was like, "Well, is it really that the Adventists were trying to control us, or was it just that they just had a?" And that's probably part of it, but I think that there was also just a misunderstanding of just the new covenant, and Christ came to fulfill the law, right? And that it doesn't matter what day, or what behavior, if your heart is right with Christ, right? And I mean that's the gospel, is that Christ came to free us from our sin, and so it's just there was the Sunset Friday, Sunset Saturday was so void of Christ's work for us in the gospel, because we're so focused on the legalism part of it, right? And that when you realize that Christ came to fulfill the law, and like we're not bound by whatever day we want to go to church, or like what behaviors God's looking at, like, yep, okay, that's okay, you're throwing a football, but you don't call it a game. Like, yeah, you just we lost, I think, just the whole point of just relationship with Christ. And I think that's what was kind of the unfortunate part, is that it was so void of all of that. And I don't know if it's because of misunderstanding of the old covenant, new covenant, and partly, control, but it's just, yeah, it was very, very unfortunate. I think, just looking back, just how much that our focus was not on the work of Christ. It was just on, like, okay, hey, is my buddy wearing his Nike tennis shoes? Well, man, get those things off, right? How dare you wear those on a Saturday?
You should have worn Jordans. How dare you?
That's right. But I mean, to your point, though, I mean, also about the swimming thing too, right? I mean, my parents, I was, third generation Adventist, is that, I mean, they would share stories about how, growing up in the South where it's hot, they'd have a swimming pool, but like they could get in the swimming pool up to their neck, but they couldn't swim around or have fun. They couldn't go get their head dunked underneath, because as soon as you dunked your head or you swam around or had fun, then that was a sin. But you could get in the pool and just stand there, but you couldn't. So it's just like, again, it's one of those, like, the core behavior is the same. It's just how you're defining what someone is doing was so ridiculous, right? And so, I mean, yeah, that just interesting things we look back and laugh on, but like, I don't know if that's still part of the core, behavioral aspect of Adventists today, or if they've changed from that. But I mean, that was the upbringing that we had and my parents had. So
That's crazy. That reminds me very similar of my LDS upbringing. Just like, you can do the same. You can walk fast, but you can't run. As soon as you
yeah,
break a certain speed, it becomes sin,
yeah,
and it's just
that's right.
so crazy to me how we just, or like my cookie example where I couldn't eat a cookie in the shape of something. It's like, it's sugar and fat and flour. And I think part of the reason why they do these kind of things is because, and I was never a Seventh-day Adventist, so I'm purely speaking from what I've experienced in the
Yeah,
wmscog. Is
yeah,
I feel like a lot of the reason why there is this kind of confusion and they muddy the waters a little bit is because I feel like that creates a dependence on the narrative and those who give the narrative. Because if they make you spiritually confused, right? Like, oh, should I eat this cookie? Oh, should I throw this football? Oh, should I go swimming? Oh, who are you going to ask? You have to ask the people who are providing you this narrative. Hey, I need you to govern my life because I can't make a decision, because I don't know how
yeah.
to make a decision. So I have to rely on the narrative giver, which is the organization. They are your relationship with God. Without them, you have no relationship with God. And that's the setup.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not sure if, I mean, I would imagine this is probably true of any religion, but like there might be Adventists out there that they truly trust in the work of Christ, to, the price he paid for their sin. And the works that happen on Sunset Friday, Sunset Saturday, maybe are just in conjunction, but they don't see that as saving. I know for us, we did growing up. That was definitely, there was a correlation there. So, I don't know. I guess I want to be fair, if there's any Adventists listening, they're like, no, my works don't save me. Okay. Like, there very well could be, somebody that holds to those views. And so I think that might be the case with a lot of religions that, uh, or at least religions that claim in the saving work of Christ, having the right understanding of who Christ is, and the right understanding of God, and just the salvation that he provides. But yeah, I just feel like for my experience growing up, and largely the Adventist worldview is very much built on this legalistic understanding of like, hey, yeah, you got to comply with the Sabbath, right? And yeah, it was very much like, okay, well, how am I supposed to know what's right and what's wrong? Well, it just depends on whose house you were at, or what their standard was, right? And that changed based on different families, and so it was all over the place. But yeah, so I mean, for me it was very much tied to salvation. To be fair, there might be somebody out there that's like, nope, that's not salvation, it's purely the work of Christ. I at least want to recognize that there might be somebody out there that's like that, but our experience was very much the two are one and the same. Works equal salvation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very. Yeah, and I think a lot of them too, like especially in the wmscog that I came from, they are all about the old covenant, and they're like, well, faith and works go together, and they are true to a certain extent. Like through your faith that saves you first produces good works in you that God has destined you for. But
Hmm.
it's not the works that grant faith. It's not the works that grant salvation. You are saved through that faith. You access the atonement of Christ. And because again, if it wasn't through faith and it was based on merit, grace would no longer be grace. It would
Yeah.
be an obligation or
Yeah.
a payment. So even faith, Paul says, is a gift from God. Even the faith we have to believe in Jesus isn't
Hmm.
ours. It's not like, oh, I have
Hmm.
faith. No, actually, God gave you that faith. It's very clear in Scripture. And so even faith, because some people argue, well, faith is a work, believing is a work. Actually, no, because God gives
Yeah.
that to you. And through that faith, if you really are saved, according to James chapter 2, your works in your life should manifest that salvation through good
Yeah.
deeds, not that
Yeah.
deeds
Absolutely.
themselves save you.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was nothing that those verses were never really taught or explained or something that we had a right understanding of, because I think that maybe similar to LDS is that you want to point to that and be like, see, you got to have your works, got to have your works. I'm like, okay, works are a result of my salvation, my faith, and they're not, a means to that. And I think that's such a critical distinction.
Yes. Yeah, the faith is a means to which works come, but works are not a means to which faith can. Like, you don't get
Yeah.
baptized and then receive faith after, right? You don't
Yeah.
keep the Sabbath and then receive faith through the Sabbath.
Mhm.
Like, even in these organizations, what leads you to do a work? It's faith. Like, even if it's not really right faith, like for instance in wmscog, when I got baptized into wmscog for a completely false god, it was my faith that moved me to do that, to be baptized, to go along with these certain laws and regulations. So even these organizations, they have that general setup, but they don't understand that it's the faith that drives everything, because the faith is what leads you to do something.
Yeah.
Nobody gets baptized and then believes in Jesus later, right? You don't see that in Scripture.
Hmm.
Nobody's like, hey, can you dunk me
Yeah.
real quick?
Yeah.
Praise Jesus, I
That's
got
true.
baptized. Like, it doesn't work that way. It
Yeah.
doesn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, back to one of your earlier questions, right? I mean, there was just so much pressure though that was felt on Saturdays, right? And so it just led to so much of like being so walking on eggshells on every little thing that we were doing. And so I felt like, man, that was just the unfortunate nature, is just completely devoid of what really the day of rest was for, or at least intended for, right? And that's just to have that relationship with God. So it just kind of twisted the whole purpose and intent of that day.
Yeah. So, I mean, even in the New Testament, Jesus says the man was not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath was made for man, because God wanted his people to rest. That's the whole point, is to rest. It's not like man was not made because the Sabbath existed, basically. So a couple questions here. I know I skipped through a lot of questions, but as I was
Yeah, that's
reading them,
fine.
I didn't really like them anymore, and I didn't want to. I want to go a different direction.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And it's my channel. I'm allowed to. I can do what I want. I'm free in Christ to do it. Yeah, it's two more questions here. Is
Yeah.
the Seventh-day Adventist Church, would you consider it like a doomsday cult? Like, was it always like fire and brimstone and God's coming and he's going to destroy you, basically, like you're living in fear constantly of Judgment Day?
Yeah, it was very much focused on end times, right? So I know there was a large fascination, or you know, just with end times in general. I just say, yeah, to include a lot of the doomsday. What does end times look like? When are the end times? And always just kind of being prepared and ready for what is end times, and And so I don't remember a whole lot of, the doom and gloom and just, that was spoken about on a weekly basis. But I just remember that was just a large part of my upbringing. Is just like, when is the end times? And there's already the great disappointment, so we got to make sure we're ready for the next one. And again, and like so, not that they had a prediction of when that was, but just very much a fascination with end times and just what is that going to look like, and Revelation and all of the imagery that's used in there. I just remember so many of the literature books that were on the wall just had so much to do with the end times imagery that's discussed in there, all the apocalyptic, nature of Revelation. So yeah, I don't know if that necessarily affected or impacted me growing up a whole lot, and just the way I operated and behaved, but it's just something that was always in the back of your mind. It's like, man, I hope I'm good enough, like for whatever this end times is going to look like. I hope I'm not going to have the mark of the beast. That was such a big thing, right? And getting the 666 on your forehead or whatever, or your wrist. So like, just that was just something that just they kind of pressed it into you. I'd say more so of like the negative rather than just the positive, what Christ had done for us.
Yeah, and I would say with the wmscog, it's very similar because a lot of their end time eschatology and a lot of their teaching derives directly from the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Yeah.
And a lot of, and even kids, they would have to watch their services and their sermons and stuff. And even the kids were subject to people like being tortured in hell. And like they would show images of it, or they would show like destruction and wars and like bodies and this kind of stuff. And the little kids had to watch it and had to experience that. And then towards the end, it's like, well, at least you're in the true organization, right? Because I think that's what it's supposed to do, is scare you. Fear creates a dependence. It creates a need. And then towards the end, they give you that little bit of like, okay, I've pressed you for 40 minutes with fear. Now let me give you that subtle release, those endorphins by, thankfully we're in the true organization. And you're like, oh, I feel that. And so every time you think of the fear, you're like, oh, at least I'm in the true organization. So that's like what calms your fear. And that creates a very strong dependence on pleasing the narrative, pleasing the organization, because you don't want that fear. You don't want that reality.
Yep.
And that's what makes it hard for people to leave. So when you left the Seventh-day Adventist Church, how did your other family take it?
Yeah, good question. I mean, not good at all, right? And I think that's part of what you see with maybe some of these cultic religions, is that there's a large risk that they place on you if you leave. And part of that risk is the family aspect of it, because, there's so much are so close to their family members that, and you see that, I think, with maybe the LDS, you might have more to say on that, but that's what I've at least observed here, is that, if you leave this religion, then you are kind of disowned. Your family disassociates from you, and there's that risk of just being cut off. And so I think that's maybe one tactic or way that these cultic religions are able to keep people in, is that, hey, you don't want to lose your family, right? You don't want to be on bad terms with your family. And so, yeah, absolutely. When we left, I remember both sets of grandparents on both sides of the family took it very, very hard, and to the point where I remember one of my grandparents had already passed that point, but like my grandma, she could not understand it, and she genuinely thought that we were going to hell because we left the Adventist church, and we were now part of a church that was, had instruments that were singing music, and she didn't like that, right? And so it was very difficult. And you guys have instruments, and you guys are singing and clapping your hands, and like it's just the oddest things, right? But like that was very, very hard for her, and I think that up until the day she passed not too long ago, I think she lived very much with this belief that we were not saved, because we were going to church on Sunday at that point and all of that, right? My other set of grandparents, they had a very hard time with that too, and it took them probably 4 or 5 years before they finally were able to have reconciliation, and they actually ended up leaving the Adventist church too, and end up coming out of it because they started investigating and digging into the doctrinal claims and beliefs that they'd never really thought about. And so
praise God,
my
man.
parents, yeah, it was really cool. I mean, it was an interesting 4 or 5 years because they just could not understand it. And they just, they were very polite and respectful when we were around them. And to include my grandma, she would never say it to our face, or at least to me and my brothers, but to my dad, her son, like, they had those conversations. And so like that one was very hard. But my other grandparents, They asked a lot of questions. They started investigating it for themselves. They started reading the New Testament more and more so. And I think just with the right lens, the right hermeneutic, that they were able to really clearly see just the beauty of the new covenant. And I think through a lot of that, it led them out of it as well too. And they are now, I'd say, followers of Christ, Christian, they, the same as we are in that regard. And so, yeah, it was very difficult though. And it was very hard on my parents, and just a lot of that disowning and just wanting to disassociate, and just the shame, I think, that came with it. That was the biggest thing, is the shame that was placed. But my parents, they had seen the truth, they experienced the truth and the life and the joy that is found in Christ. And once they got away from the legalism, I mean, when you just have that truth and that joy, that was no shame could overcome that. And I think that's what it was just cool to see with my parents, is that they were not, falling for a lot of the shaming that came from both my grandparents. And so it was just a great opportunity for them just to kind of speak into my grandparents' lives. And I think ultimately my grandparents on the one side ended up coming out of it, which is great. So
That's awesome. Praise God. I mean,
yeah.
freedom in Christ, I can say, is the best feeling that I will never get tired of. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
he said, "Come to me, my yoke is easy, my burden is light, have rest for your souls." And I feel like, in a way, I appreciate what I've gone through. And maybe you can attest to this too, but I appreciate what I've gone through, because I was under the law for a long time, and I was in some weird situations a lot of my life. But I can say this confidently, that I appreciate grace and freedom in Christ more than the average Christian, because unless you've gone through something, um, and I'm not saying no Christian has gone through something or anything like that. I'm just saying, through being under a law for so long and having that crushing anxiety and that, am I good enough? Am I this? Am I that? I have to keep every obligation of this narrative, and all these things piling up. To have that just released from you and taken from you, I
Hmm.
mean, you're on cloud nine. You feel like you can fly. And I appreciate God's grace and freedom more than I think I would have had I not gone through that kind of experience.
Yeah. No, I would absolutely agree. And it's not just that, now I can do whatever I want on Saturdays, and now I have this freedom to do my thing, right? During
Yeah.
this time period where I formerly couldn't. But it's just the focus, and it's the heart shift of just not, I'm not putting my focus and prioritization of just my existence on doing or not doing certain things during a certain 24-hour period. But it's like, man, once, like you said, when Christ freed us from that, it wasn't that now I can play sports on Saturday. It's just across the board, just with the way that you live, and just, see God for who he is, and rightly understand what Christ has done for us. There's just a lot of freedom in that, regardless of what day it is. So it's not that I can watch a movie or, play sports, whatever, but I mean, it's just not having that burden that was placed on us. Now that that's been lifted, it just changes. It just has changed our how we view God, our relationship with God, how we just live our lives glorifying God, rather than trying to be very specific about certain things I can't do.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll kind of wrap this up here. I have one last question for you. To
Yeah, absolutely.
to any Seventh-day Adventists who might be watching this, who are currently, who are current, or who are maybe questioning or on the fence or something like that, just take a couple minutes and just kind of speak to them, and just kind of just bear your heart out to them, what you wish for them and what you encourage them with.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, for any Adventists, first of all, Jesus loves every single one of us, and God, sent Jesus to pay the price of everyone's sin. And I know an Adventist would agree with that. But we have freedom in Christ, which is not tied to, what merit can I, what things can I do to merit, God's love for me, or that freedom. I have to earn that by, doing certain things on, or things I shouldn't be doing on a certain time period, 24-hour period, or on a certain day of the week. Just when you have that freedom in Christ, it frees you from the legalism. And I would just encourage, Adventists just to read through the New Testament and have a mindset that's wanting to understand what is the new covenant, and what does that mean, and what does that look like. And I think that for us, it was game changing just to see, like, okay, yeah, I'm not bound by the law. Yes, we live a life that is, once we accept Christ, yes, there are works that come from that, and we live we're growing in our sanctification. But if there are Adventists that are like, yeah, I'm saved through Christ and I trust in Him alone, it's not my works that save me. That's great. Great starting point. I would just encourage them just to kind of look at, okay, so what is the religion teaching as far as what you can and can't do, and the boundaries, and what God is happy with or accept. What is He not accepting of? What is that tied to? Is that tied to our heart posture and how we're living our life for Christ, or is that tied to what things am I trying to adhere to that at the end of the day are just very subjective and arbitrary and relative, and they're really not even grounded in the new covenant, and when you rightly understand what the new covenant is. So I just encourage them just to read the New Testament. I know they probably have to a large degree, but just what is the New Covenant, and what does that mean, and what is the outworkings of that, and how does that affect my life and what Christ has done, and what does that free me from? I think is the biggest thing. So, Christ died for all of us. We're all sinful, but there's nothing we can do to earn salvation other than just accept who Christ. Put our faith in Jesus, and so for me, that was just largely tied to what I couldn't do on Saturday. But man, Christ freed us from a lot of that, and just the shame and the guilt that came from, am I doing enough? Am I not doing enough? I never know. If I have to behave this certain way, it's like, no, like we're all going to make mistakes, but Christ has died for those mistakes. As long as I put my faith, ultimate trust in Him, that's through no other name is salvation found, or no thing or behavior. So that's just probably what I would want to leave with your viewers that are Adventists. And if they're already in that position, great. But I just know that the SDA religion or worldview, the beliefs and the claims, that's what I would just probably caution. What does it teach? Vice, how are you really acting and behaving, on a day-to-day basis? And so just caution against some of what the religion teaches.
Awesome, man. Well, I'll leave it right there. I think that's a great place to wrap it up here. For those watching, I appreciate you. If you haven't given your life to Christ, I highly recommend it. Read your Bible, pray to God, have Him reveal the truth to you, because the truth will indeed set you free.
It's true.
It set me free. It set Chris's families free and his grandparents. Thank God. And yeah, if you're still watching this, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and do all that stuff, because the algorithm or whatnot. And on the screen, there's going to be a playlist that I'm going to offer to let you watch, because it's got a lot of my wmscog ex-friends that were in the wmscog, so you can watch those, their ex-testimonies. And yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next one.